सर एक मिनट रुकिए बहुत शुक्रिया आ जा रहे आप दुनिया में आप तो मैं नहीं वो नहीं मानते यार
This is Sadia Shepard, and I'll be moderating today's session, which is entitled Promising New Writings in English. I'm really delighted to be here at the Karachi Literature Festival. This is my second year I've had the opportunity to come and speak, and I couldn't be more thrilled to be a part of this important session. I wanted to tell you a little bit about our distinguished panelists this morning. We are joined by some wonderful thinking minds who've done a lot of thinking about our topic. And we're going to begin with Maniza Shamsi, who's here on my right. She's serving her second term as regional chairperson for Europe and South Asia of the Commonwealth Writers' Prize. She is guest editor of the special Pakistan issue of the Journal of Postcolonial Writing, which is forthcoming in May of 2011. And she is managing editor of a work in progress, which is called the Oxford Companion to the Literatures of Pakistan. The American edition of her anthology, And the World Changed, Contemporary Stories by Pakistani Women, received in the US the 2009 Gold IPPPY, which is the Independent Publisher of the Year Book Award, and the 2009 Bronze Forward Magazine Award for the Best Anthology of the Year. Please join me in welcoming Maniza Shamsi.
Thank you.
So much has been said about this incredible new surge of writing, Pakistani writing in English. And I wanted to ask Maniza Shamsi, being such an expert in this area, if she could bring us up to speed on her thoughts on where we are now in terms of new writing in English in Pakistan.
Well, as far as new writing in English is concerned, we're really taking off in a big way, I think. One of the things that keeps coming up is that because Pakistan is in the eye of the world, that is why this literature has been receiving so much attention. I know this is true because obviously in this kind of media-savvy world, there's a link between topicality and literature and what people want to read. But I don't think that really is the answer to talent. I mean, there is talent, and this new talent is coming up. It seems to be as if, you know, all this long history since 1947, even before, seems to be gelling together, and it's a kind of roller coaster effect, and it's just snowballing. I've been thinking about this, and there are a lot of reasons for this. One of the things is that, you know, we live in a world where you have communication with other English-speaking countries, with the rest of the world. If you look at the book trade in the 50s or 60s in Pakistan, there were very limited books available. So what does a young person read? Then there was a lack of a critical discourse where, you know, in that, you know, if today we excluded all the writers who were living in diaspora and chose only to discuss those living in Pakistan, we would not really have a very big body of work. But in the 60s, I mean, Zulfikar Ghaus is sitting here, he was writing this wonderful work, and he was writing metafiction, experimental fiction, you know, magic realism, and Pakistan was completely unaware of this. The result of this was this lack of awareness also, of course, affects other writers. You're writing in isolation without any links to the outside world. And then, of course, then there was all that, the electronic media, the satellite television. The British Council had a creative writing workshop. It was called I Belong, which was conducted by Kamla. And it was some years ago, and they published a little book from it. There were 5 pupils. I had been with the British Council. I had been one of the people who'd vetted the early entries, and then she had chosen the winners. One of them actually is now on the grant, but Bilal Talwir is now on the grantor list of new writers, and he's had a fellowship to Columbia. But I remember meeting these young people, And I asked them what they wanted, what they read, who they read. And I was absolutely stumped that they were reading people like Edna St. Vincent Millay. I mean, that really threw me. When I was that age, God, I hadn't heard of Doris Lessing when I was 20, you know. And here they were with access. And where did this access came from? It came from the internet. It came from the media. In the last 10 years, the books that you get here are much more contemporary than you had before. And there is now, because of the book reviews, there's a link between the book trade. All these things, if you're interested in writing, it kind of forms a kind of direction. Added to that, of course, you have the creative writing workshops, you have travel, people going to universities, coming back, the interest of publishers. All that together hones talent. And the success of your fellow countrymen also makes you feel, well, I can do that too, or I can write like that too. I'm talking too much almost. I'll tell you another 1960s story about Marki Qureshi. She was a distinguished poet, as a teacher to many people. She had a degree in English. She'd been to Smith. And she was already teaching in Karachi University when she read, I think it was a work by Derek Walcott. And she thought, oh, I can write like that. Because you didn't know in those days how to place your bilingual inheritance, your duality, within the English language. There was very little happening, although there was a tradition in Indian English writing, pre-partition Indo-Anglian as they call it, but there had been a severance. And so we had a few writers. We had Ahmad Ali, we had Shahid Surawardi, but it was a very small group. And now there's a big group, and there's more of them, and as more of them, and publishers also look at work. They don't think of Pakistan, you know, like poor Babsi Sitwell used to say, I mean, she's not poor, and she's done very well. But she said when she sent in her books, people looked and sighed and said, oh, well, Pakistan's too far and remote, you know, for our readers to relate to. So I think that's part of the answer.
That's very interesting. I mean, I'm struck by, you know, here, Pakistan is, of course, it hasn't changed geographically. Its location hasn't changed. And yet somehow now, Pakistan used to be considered very far and remote, and now is considered, often described in the media as at the epicenter, at the crossroads, situated between, you know, these important neighbors. And there's a lot of talk now about where Pakistan is geographically placed. There was some discussion yesterday in the panel on Works in Progress, featuring many of Pakistan's sort of great young literary stars, novelists. There was some discussion that perhaps the talent has always been here, but it's merely now that the light is being shined on Pakistan. And I wondered if you agree with that, or another argument that I've heard discussed here at the festival is perhaps it's also that a new generation of writers coming of age, specifically those who have gone abroad and returned home. And I hear these two currents concurrently, and I was wondering your thoughts on that.
Well, no, actually, I do not think the talent has always been here, because one of the other projects that I'm working on is a history of Pakistani English literature. And actually, there was a huge amount of work which has been written in English by Pakistanis. The ones who actually produced work that was cohesive, that, you know, you sort of was Zulfikar Ghaus and Babsi Sitwa. Zulfikar Ghaus's work was in the 60s, Babsi in the late 1970s and 80s. But in between that, from partition, I mean, even though Mumtaz Shahnawaz's book, I mean, there was talent, and she died before she could do anything with it. She died in 1948. I mean, it's a hugely sort of cumbersome work, although I don't think one can deny her talent. But then she didn't live. But there's an enormous amount of short stories, fiction. You know, it's not really very good. I mean, it's interesting because you have these people struggling and wanting to express, but I don't think it holds a candle to what is being produced today. And these were people who did travel. They had access. One or two of them published, you know, in those Duckworth and places, they used to publish quite a lot. They published abroad. And I don't think that talent was there. In fact, Tariq Rahman, in his History of Pakistani Literature, when he's commenting on an anthology, and he writes, and he says, well, there's nothing you can really do, because there was poetry talent. There was not fiction talent, there was poetry talent. That was happening, and that's one of my great things, is that it has not received the cognizance it's due. There was Tawfiq Rafaq, there was Adrian, who was conducting a workshop here today, Salman. They emerged very strongly in the late 60s, and they carried on through the 70s. And they've had and it's my great regret that they have not received the international recognition they're due. And one of the things that you mentioned, that I'm doing this special Pakistan issue of on Pakistan for the Journal of Post-Colonial Literature. It's an academic journal, and it's got critical articles by Claire Chambers, who's here today. She's one of the contributors. And one of the things I did for that, in the creative section, I did make a point to try and include as much homegrown Pakistani talent, rather than the writers published abroad, and some younger writers. And I think this homegrown talent, which is in existence, is not necessarily young, but it is here, and that is what we need to now. That's also got to do with outlets and forums and publishing opportunities.
So could you bring us up to speed a little bit on the homegrown talent that you're seeing? And that's an interesting point, that it's not all young. I think that there is an assumption sometimes that you decide to be a writer in your teens or 20s, and then you carry on forward. But that's not always the case. There's, of course, tremendous examples in literature of people who have had entirely different careers and come to writing at different stages in their life. Could you tell us a little bit about the homegrown talent that you're seeing now, and any trends that you're noticing in terms of that sphere?
Well, one homegrown talent is kind of, there's I haven't seen it, but there's a gentleman called Jamil Ahmed, and he's about, I think Kamla's told me about him, he's in his 70s, I think, and he's just got his first collection of short stories, and it's being published in Britain. And he's just been discovered, but he's been writing for years. And the homegrown talent is people like Salman, people like Adrian Hussein, people like Athar Tahir. It's mostly, it is the poetry. And we had this wonderful slew of books in 1997 where they brought out these anthologies, but there was just no outlet. I mean, poetry, we were discussing this last night, poetry doesn't have the same kind of resonance, as, the same sort of glamour as fiction in this day and age. But it is very much then, it's poetry of a high quality. And the other sad thing is there seems to be absolutely no interchange between poets and, I mean, you know, we've had interchange with fiction. We've had no interchange, as far as I can see, between writers of English language fiction in Pakistan and in the diaspora. And we don't even know the names of the diaspora. We don't know the names of Muniza Alvi, who's written 6 collections, who's been shortlisted for the T.S. Eliot Award. She's won the Cholmondeley Prize. She's a major, major British poet, but she's of Pakistani origin.